Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with your hosts Jon Macaskill and Will Schneider. Here we focus on helping men and those with men in their lives solve some of life's complex challenges through understanding the practices of mindfulness and how they can help. Each episode is in an environment free of judgment and criticism, with a focus on authenticity and inner peace. Let's dig in.
Most people live in a very restricted circle of their potential being. They make use of a very small portion of their possible consciousness and of their soul's resources in general, much like a man who, out of his whole organism, should get into a habit of using and moving only his little finger. This is a quote from The Rise of Superman, Decoding the Science of Ultimate Human Performance by author Steven Kotler. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness, where I, Jon Macaskill, and my co-host, Will Schneider, and all of our guests work to demystify mindfulness and all things related to mindfulness. We are so excited to have with us today 10 times best-selling author Steven Kotler. Will and I are huge fans of his work and have read several of his books. And today we'll talk about achieving peak performance, creativity, passion, flow, and altered consciousness. Before we do that, though, I'm going to turn it over to Will for a few short announcements. Will, great to see you, brother.
Great to see you, Jon. Great to be back. Great to have Steven joining us today, and he'll pop on in a moment. Announcements. You've probably been hearing about it. Maybe you need to dig into it, but we have a retreat coming up, a mindfulness adventure retreat on September 16th and the 18th, and we'd love for you to join us. And if you want to learn more, head over to mentalkingmindfulness.com/retreat. Or if you want to listen to Jon and I kind of chatting about our mindfulness adventure retreat, there's a link here we're going to drop into the live feed, and we'll add it also onto the show notes as well. And then we also have last announcement. We have our MTM summer merch sale going on right now. You get a beautiful shirt just like Jon has. Show that shirt, Jon. We also have we also added to our collection a custom designed super MTM t-shirt. So if you'd like to see what that's all about, head over to mentalkingmindfulness.com/merch. And without further ado, let's bring up Steven Kotler.
Let's do it. Hey, good morning, Steven.
How are you?
All right. Doing great. Great to have you. So excited about this episode. So I'll jump into the bio quick, and then we'll do our opening practice like we normally do. And then, Steven, we'll get into questions, and we're gonna ask you some great questions. I think we're going to do a little bit different than what you're used to. So for our audience, Steven Kotler, I know most of you know who he is, but by those who may not, if you've been living under a rock or in a cave, Steven is a New York Times bestselling author, an award-winning journalist, and the executive director of the Flow Research Collective. He is one of the world's leading experts on human performance. He is the author of 10, count that, 10 bestsellers out of 14 books, including The Art of the Impossible, right here, The Future is Faster Than You Think, Stealing Fire, The Rise of Superman, Bold and Abundance. And today we're going to touch on his new novel out now, The Devil's Dictionary. His work has been nominated for 2 Pulitzer Prizes, translated into over 50 languages, and has appeared in over 100 publications, including the New York Times Magazine, Wired, Atlantic Monthly, Wall Street Journal, Time, and the Harvard Business Review. Steven is a lifelong environmentalist and animal rights advocate, and is the founder of Planet Home, a conference, concert, innovation accelerator focused on solving critical environmental challenges. The co-founder of the Forest Plus Fire Collective, a network of individuals, organizations, and institutions dedicated to ending catastrophic wildfire and restoring forest health to the American West, which is huge right here in Colorado. Alongside his wife, author Joy Nicholson, he is also the co-founder of Rancho de Chihuahua, a hospice care and special needs dog sanctuary. Steven, you are a busy, busy man. So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you carving out some time to join us.
My pleasure. It's good to be with you.
And Will, I'm going to turn it over to you for the grounding practice.
This is everybody, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, maybe take a moment and stop. If you can, close your eyes, and we're just going to do some real simple, very simple breathing practice just to help, clear our head, ground us into this space. and get ready for what's coming next. So ground your feet on the floor if you like, maybe the hands in your thighs, or maybe bring them onto the table. Again, eyes upward and closed, that's your choice. And we'll just start with a nice little exhale out the mouth. Maybe as you exhale, you can make some sound coming out of the back of the throat to release that space and energy in the throat. And then take a big giant inhale through your nose, really big breath, all the way to the top of the chest, and exhale out the mouth again. Let's do 4 or 5 more of those. Inhale, really big balloon breath in. Exhale. And as you exhale, maybe feel your body sinking into your sit bones or grounding deeper into your feet. And we do it again. Inhale, really big. Exhale, let it go. Good. Last 2. Inhale. Exhale, nice and easy. Last one. In big. Keep going. Exhale, let that go out. And take a moment, make little micro movements through the head, neck, and shoulders. Maybe put a little smile on your face. You get a little dopamine hit. And open your eyes. And we are back, and we are live. And Steven, again, we're so happy you're here.
All right, let's jump into those questions. Okay, Steven, so I held up the books here, and your books and all the interviews that Will and I have watched, they're all about flow, creativity, the altered mind states, peak performance. Those are all trillion-dollar industries. The science behind these, the flow and how to achieve them. We want to get into some of that today, but we also want to know more about you and not just your research and your books. So our interview will be a lot different than what you may be used to. So that said, what is it about writing that has you hooked?
Well, that's a funny question to start with. Only because the answer is going to set a weird tone for everything that follows. But
go for it.
Writing is. Joan Didion used to talk about how she had to write about stuff before she could figure out what she thought about stuff. So there's some of that, right? But a lot of it is, I learned sort of. I always say that this one of the secrets. First of all, I love what I do, and I love all of it, and I love putting words together in a straight line, and I love rhythm and language and all the puzzle of it and all that stuff. But I learned. I was 22. I had just gotten out of college. I had a senior thesis that was a poem. It was an epic poem, and I knew this poem was actually a novel, and I had to turn this epic poem into a novel to get into graduate school in fiction writing, which is what I wanted to do, right? I was trained as an undergraduate as a poet, and calling this woman my girlfriend is the wrong term because she wasn't even that. But this woman I was sort of dating at the time, who I was really in love with, and who summarily dumped me. I had all this angst and all this pain and all this, 21-year-old, oh my God, I'm going to die. Maybe I was 22. And I learned that you can turn pain into words. And I got really good at turning first pain and then all other emotions into words. So whatever life throws at me, I process it, heal it, or deal with it, whatever, through writing. So yes, I love playing with language and everything else, but that's what I mean. It's going to change the tone of what we're doing. But I've always said that was sort of one of the secrets to my success is I watch other writers, we're a volatile species, and I watch other writers get sort of pummeled by life, right? And it's hard here. It's hard for everybody. And I watch, a lot of truly great writers, friends of mine, enormous talents who they get hit by rock by life, and it's a pause. They can't, till everything's right again, they can't write. And in my experience, you get rocked by life way too much. If that's your plan, you're never going to actually make a living as a writer, right? Work is what you do despite life, not, you know what I mean? And or to process life, at least for me. So I always say that one of the ways that there's two ways you can really, I always say you can tell a real creative from somebody else. And one is creatives are always about the next thing. So if you talk to me, it's very rarely am I interested in the book that I just published. I want to tell you about what I'm working on and where I'm going next, right? So that's always, I think, sign one. And sign two is true artists use their work as their salvation. It's where you run to when you need someplace to run. So those two qualities to me, even though, as somebody who knows a great deal about creativity and creativity of the brain, nowhere in the definition of creativity will see those two qualities, but I think they tend to define like people who are real creatives.
Well, it brings all. Yeah, God, I'm sorry, Steven.
I'm done. Please, over to you. One housekeeping thing. I love that opening quote that you read. It's wonderful. Thank you for giving me credit for it. But that's William James. I was quoting William James. You're not the only person who's done that. A bunch of people love that quote. Pull it out.
That's awesome.
I think I actually must have written whatever I did. I screwed up. I didn't make it clear enough that that's William James, because you're not the only person who has done it.
Okay. Well, thanks for the grace.
Yeah, I totally screwed up on that one. I'm sure of it.
Well, is William James one of your influences? Because you also quote him in The Art of the Impossible too.
Yeah, and by the way, Last Tango in Cyberspace, which is this companion novel to the Devil's Dictionary, he's all the way through. He's a little bit in Devil's Dictionary. William James is a giant hero of mine, because he was the first, the science of peak performance, modern peak performance, post Darwin, right? Darwin comes along. Before Darwin, peak human performance is a gift from the gods, right? You want a better time in the 100-yard dash, you pray to Hermes or some variation thereof. Yeah. The muses can help you with your poems, and the gods change over the years. But like even coming to the Enlightenment, the purpose of the Enlightenment is we can use rational thought to perfect ourselves and mimic the divine, right? So it's only when Darwin shows up that somebody goes, oh crap, this is biological, not theological. We need new systems. And Nietzsche's the first person who really starts calling for that. And then James, who contemporary of Nietzsche, but just like maybe 5-10 years younger, really is the one who answers that call more than anybody else. And when he comes into the field, he doesn't do what, 20th century, I talk about it as like 100-year detour around peak human performance. James comes in and says, okay, we got to look at altered states. We got to look at possibilities. We did the quote you read, which is about second winds and third winds and how we can achieve all this. And then right after James, Freud comes along and says, no. Psychology is about fixing what's broken. We're not interested in, what's possible. We're here to fix what's broken. And psychology takes this 100-year detour that doesn't really come back together until Csikszentmihalyi and Martin Seligman sort of form the positive. And really got to give credit to Ellen Langer, because she's the godmother of positive psychology, and she was there before anybody else, really, with sort of like mindfulness, for example. She was probably the first person in an academic setting who was really talking about mindfulness seriously.
Yeah, in The Art of the Impossible, I think you used, and I'm going to butcher it because I'm just pulling it out of my memory here, but you said something about how psychology was used at one point to basically keep our lips above water so that we could breathe. And now it's going into getting our heads into the clouds, really getting that peak performance.
I always think about it as, and this is, for good reason, it happened this way. But psychology was really about going from subpar back to normal, right? Mm-hmm. And nobody really sort of started to look at how do you go from normal up to super. Nietzsche did, right? Nietzsche, that was the whole Ubermensch thing, right? Like, how do we do that? And that was his project. And James sort of picked up on that. And it's interesting because James also, like, another of my contemporary heroes, a guy named Yuri Bezaki, who's a neuroscientist in New York at Columbia, hates James because he says that James ruined neuroscience because he writes the first psychology textbook. And the brain, James did what everybody else did. They started to tell the story of the brain from the senses out, working their way in. And Bezaki in contemporary neuroscience points out that, like, the brain didn't work that way. It evolved from this like black box inside, like gray goo inside a box, and it had to interpret the world. So like what our senses are getting, that's none of that stuff is available to the brain, and you have to actually work from the inside out. And that James distorted the whole of neuroscience for 100 years, but it doesn't change the fact that he's still a giant hero of mine.
Right, for sure.
Well, I love it. It's like one of the ingredients that you continually talk about in all the work that you're doing about flow is that passion. And obviously you're very passionate about what you do. And you can just hear it even when you're talking about your inspirations like William James. But like as a writer, like what, have been, even just as a man, as a person on this planet, like what have been some of your like little and big eyes, if you will, that kind of brought you where you are today?
Can I define those terms? Little and
Please,
big eyes?
please.
Yeah. Yeah, please be the teacher, man. Be the teacher. Thank you.
Only because it'll help. He's referencing something that's the opening of The Art of Impossible, and I talk about how I have spent my career sort of studying people who have accomplished capital I impossible, that which has never been done. And I've looked at this in sort of every field, in sports and science and art and technology and business and so forth. And there's also small I impossible, which is all the stuff that we believe is impossible for ourselves. So the example I give in The Art of Impossible, the small I impossible, is I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I wanted to be a writer from pretty early on in my life, definitely like before I got to high school. And Cleveland in the 70s was a blue collar steel mill town, right? It was very working class. And I didn't know any writers. My parents didn't know any writers. I didn't know how to become a writer. There was no path. I had this dream, but it's a small lie impossible because there was no clear path between where I was and where I wanted to go. And statistically, really bad odds of success, right? Like, it's hard to become a writer, a successful writer. And so that's what I mean by small I impossible. And I always, in my experience, after doing this for a lot of decades at this point, I've met almost nobody, with a couple of like, I'm going to break a world record exceptions, anybody who's like gone after capital I impossible. What usually happens is you start going after small I impossible. You're like, oh shit, I could do that. Oh wow, look. And it just, one thing leads to the next and leads to the next. And in the end, oftentimes this big capital I impossible that people from the outside look at and go, oh my God, that's amazing. From the inside, when you're in the room or when it happens, people often don't even notice because it's just the thing that comes next. It's, it looks huge and dramatic on the outside when you look in, but from the inside, it's just like, this is the next step, and this is the next step, and this is the next step. And it's interesting. One of the obviously becoming a professional writer was a very big deal. Getting into graduate school, because this is a really weird story, but I was almost everybody who could have said, don't be a writer, tried to fail me my senior year in high school, because my senior thesis, which is a collection of poems, offended people. I was a punk rocker, and it was my yeah. So I offended, and they tried to fail me. I had to go to war to win that one. When I went to as an undergraduate, I was thrown out of my creative writing department for a number of different reasons. One, I was a punk rocker, and I had this bad habit of like telling the truth, which is a bad thing apparently, especially in the creative writing program. But they asked me to leave mostly because I was doing really cutting edge stuff with words, and they didn't have anybody in the department who did that kind of stuff. And they actually, to their credit, they hired a couple people and invited me back a couple years later.
Oh wow!
Once they changed the department, but it took me forever to get into graduate school, and I decided I was only going to go to Johns Hopkins because a guy named John Barth was there, and he was the godfather of a writing genre known as American metafiction, and that's what I was trying to do. And I figured nobody else knew what I was doing, and I was like, I will go to Hopkins because Barth will know, and he'll be able to tell me if I have any talent or if I should just quit. Because everybody else keeps telling me to quit, but they don't know what the hell I'm doing. Right? Let me find the one guy who will understand what the hell I'm doing. And if he thinks I have talent, great, this is my job. And if he tells me I don't, I'm out. And it took like 3 years to get into Hopkins because there's like 9 spots in the program, and 5 of them go to alumni, and 3 of them go to like senators' daughters. And so there's like 2 spots that are actually open to the public. And it took a really long time. That was a big hurdle for me, because it was, and when I got to grad school, and Barth actually loved my writing and ended up blurbing my first novel. Those were big, because it's hard to, as you're coming up as a writer. I wasn't in New York. I was on the West Coast, and it wasn't like I wasn't in that milieu. And it was hard to figure out, am I any good? Is this what I should do? Those kinds of questions. But I will also say, and then we can go on to another topic, but I never talk about this, but it was hugely impactful. So when I graduated high school, it was my height, which is 5'10", and I weighed 119 pounds.
Wow.
It's tiny. I'm an ectomorph. I'm super skinny. So I wasn't a particularly good athlete because I was so skinny. I didn't have any muscles on me. And I went from the time I graduated high school to the time, like 2 years out of college, I was about up to 170. So I put on a tremendous amount. It was all muscle. And it took a very long time, right? I was a slow gainer. I remember being in San Francisco. I was in a gym. Like, I'd been working out for 5 years. 5 years, like 3-4 times a week, going hard. And, this huge Colossus dude walks up to me, punches me in the shoulder. He's like, "Don't worry, buddy. Just stick with it. You'll get muscle." I wanted to kill him. I was like 5 years in. So, like,
That's great.
into shape, like real shape, to be able to, I spent my 20s chasing professional athletes around mountains and across oceans. And that required a level of fitness that was like, I went from like not being in shape at all and being like a punk rock nerd to being able to chase professional athletes around mountains. And that was not an easy transformation for me. And one of the reasons I've broken so many bones, we were talking about that before the show, is because I'm so skinny. So, I don't have a lot of mass around my bones. I just break.
Yeah.
I think you don't have a lot of.
No, I was similar in the sense of I was skinny until I was like 20. I don't know, something. My freshman year, all of a sudden, I put on like 20 pounds. Like, I'm 6'3" now. When I went to college, I was like 5'11", but I understand that skinniness, and I don't know if it was.
You break it up a
the
little.
Testosterone.
Yeah.
I think I might be HD there, John. I think it's the HD.
Yeah. Maybe drop out, and then I'll bring you back. Drop out and bring you back.
Okay.
But
right, yeah, sounds
but
good.
I'll just so
yeah.
Yep. So I was talking about, you mentioned, fear there, and in The Art of the Impossible, you talk about how fear can actually be a good thing, right? A lot of us run away from fear, but extreme athletes seem to use fear as a driving force. I'd love to maybe talk about how you may have used that for your own, growth or drive in both as an author and as an extreme athlete.
From a performance standpoint, right? Focus is very expensive, as you know, right? And it's from an energetic perspective, it's what we spend most of our resources on. So anytime you can get focus for free, it's a big deal, right? So you talk about a lot of our intrinsic motivators: curiosity, passion, purpose, those sorts of things. One of the big deals there is we get focus for free. You're curious about something, you just automatically pay attention to it. You don't have to work to do it. Oh, wow, that's so cool. Fear works the same way, right? It's phenomenal. When you're scared of something, you can't not focus on it. The
Right.
problem is too much fear. And really what we're talking about is the norepinephrine and the cortisol, but most of the norepinephrine, the neurochemical that's underneath most fear and anxiety, is a little bit is great. Primes the brain for learning. It feels exciting, but it's a very thin line. And once you get over that, it does all kinds of disastrous things for performance. It blocks learning. It blocks our access to kind of automatic movement patterns and muscle pattern and all that stuff. So it's a very thin line. And it takes, I think, a very long time to learn to work with fear. At least for me, it certainly did. And I I'd like to tell you that I was smart about it all the time. You know what I mean? And I went slowly and and I didn't. Like, I was like everybody else. I broke a lot of bones because I was stupid. And I was like, okay, here's this thing I'm terrified of. I'm just going to do it. It'll be fine. And a lot of times it wasn't fine, actually. A lot of times it was, oh shit, I'm back in the hospital. That was good, right. But for anybody I know who's sort of really at the top of their game in any profession, including sports, they've tapped into this. So you asked for a couple examples in writing. I always say in writing, in any book, there's 3 challenges. There's the ideas I need to communicate in the book to a reader, right? That's the first level of challenge. And that's usually fairly visible to my readers in terms of like what I'm trying to do. And then there's a style challenge, right? To do it in a cool, fun, interesting way. But there's always another challenge in my books that's not visible. I'll give you an example. You were waving Stealing Fire around earlier. So information density in my books is oddly 1 to 2 facts a sentence as a general rule. Wow. Stealing Fire is an incredibly dense book, very dense. And if you, it doesn't read that way, but there's actually, because there's so much content that needs to get covered, and there's a lot of sentences in there that are like 3 or 4 facts sort of tucked into one sentence. I didn't know how to do that very well. I actually and I wanted to do it. I didn't just want to make it boring. I wanted to do it in a way that was like lively and fun and interesting for my readers and all that stuff. I spent a lot of time studying writers. Steven Kotler actually was a big model for me. He's funny. He's a good science writer. His sentences are very, very dense, and he doesn't lose people, right? His books are, The Language Instinct was the last bestseller on language, and it's a hugely complicated book, and yet it was wildly popular. So there was something I was reading writers like that to try to figure out, how do you increase the information density in the sentence? The other option is, let's write a 1,000-page book. Nobody wants to read a 1,000-page book, right? And it doesn't, I get really excited when I buy a book and it's like 800 pages long and 1,000, because I'm like, okay, cool. This is going to change me in some way. But most people don't. And, there's actually a drop off in book sales when you get to 300 pages.
Oh, wow.
Under 300 pages, at 300 pages, you need a lot of word of mouth basically to overcome that barrier, because people are like, okay, they see a 400 or 500 page book and they're like, really? That's like a 2-3 week commitment. Are you sure? And so, right.
Very true.
If you don't want to run into that barrier, and sometimes in my books, I'm more than willing to do that. You know what I mean? But like Stealing Fire wasn't that. It was a book about a sort of a revolution in how the mainstream was using altered states of consciousness to improve performance. And I wanted that story to go into the mainstream. That was important part of telling it. So, thus the challenge was, how do you pack in the information so we can tell the story in under 300 pages or so, without being boring, and et cetera, et cetera. And with the same thing with action sports, though goal setting in action sports can be very tricky. As an athlete, I'm very cautious with the goals I set. One of the things that I think is really important in peak performance is you have to keep your word, and you really have to keep your word to yourself more than anything else. So I talk about this. I think I talk about it in Art Impossible, and I definitely talk about it in the book that's coming out next January in our country. It's really important to keep your word to yourself. And if you create a goal, that's a promise to yourself. And so if I state a goal out loud, I will die before I don't achieve it. It's a law. If it comes out of my mouth and I say I'm going to do it. So now this is really problematic for people who work with me, because if it comes out of your mouth, I think that also means that, you're going to do it. And it turns out not everybody works that way. Turns out I didn't know that. So I'm very cautious with action sport goals, because they can get you into, so, you can set a really outrageous ski goal. I'm going to ski blah, blah, blah this season. And every time you ski past blah, 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 and you look up and you go, I haven't skied that thing yet. It's terrifying. That mounting fear can cause me problems. So I'm cautious with action sport goals, which is not to say I don't set them, but I'm cautious with them. And I usually, usually when I set action sport goals, it's like, okay, here's my year-long plan that I'm going to follow that, should lead to here, rather than, okay, I'm just going to do this, because just do this usually puts me in the hospital.
Will, let's give your mic a test.
Am I back? Is it work?
Yeah, better.
All right.
Way better.
I literally, it's 95 degrees here in the city. I was telling John before we jumped on, I literally put my computer on an ice pack so it stays cool. I think
Wow.
hopefully it works.
Yeah,
I think
so
it's
I'll turn it over
working.
to you, Will.
No, actually, I think it's 95 degrees here, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, but I don't have air conditioning right now. I just went into this place, but I don't know exactly what we missed. But let's talk about focus, right? And everything in a lot of your books on flow, and a lot of the talks that you give, TED Talks, and interview, time and time again, you say, flow follows focus. And so how do you get focused? Like, what's your process? Do you have a process, like, and to start to activate the flow process?
I like to wake up, do like 6 or 7 lines of cocaine, and then hit myself in the head with a hammer.
Perfect.
Really well. That's not you guys do. You don't do that. That's no.
Every morning.
No, not yet. No, I'm not there yet. I still meditate, but
I do all. I mean, focus is eminently trainable. I think so. Let's start at the beginning. Flow follows focus. Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. And the first one, the most well-known, is complete concentration. So the question, like, what does that mean? And I always tell people, for me, and in peak performance, it means a couple of things. One, I like to focus I like 90-minute blocks of concentration, because the brain has a built-in slot for focusing for about 90 to 120 minutes. In the same way that we go through a sleep cycle, a REM cycle that's 90 minutes to 120 minutes long, we have a wake and focus cycle. You probably know this. Same length. So I try to, especially with crucial work sessions, that's the length I want to go for. I also, I practice distraction management. I'm no different than anybody else. Like, I'm not more powerful than my devices. And my cell phone was designed to mimic a slot machine, the most addictive technology in the world, right? That's what they put in my pocket. And so distraction management means everything gets turned off ahead of time. I like to manicure my office I like to start writing at 4 a.m. So before I leave for the day, I turn everything off. So emails off, messages are off, notifications are off. Oftentimes I don't bring my cell phone into the office with me for my morning writing session at all. And I've also had my conversations ahead of time. People forget this when they talk about focus. I've talked to my wife. She knows, hey, I'm doing this from now to now. Please leave me alone, right? And my friends and my coworkers, and you know what I mean? Those conversations are had in advance as well. And then I do all the other stuff that, people do for focus, which is, I work, first of all, I meditate, which is obviously great for focus. Though lately I've been really, for the past year and a half, I've been playing with loving kindness meditation, which is
meta, hell yeah,
much different. That's different from a focus training. Like, we've known focus meditation enhances flow and flow proneness since the 70s or 80s. A guy named Michael Posner, who's one of the great gods of attention, neuroscience, pointed that out. And I've meditated one version or another since probably 1993 or 4, so a very long time, and probably done yoga since 95. So I've got long histories with those things, and obviously they're all great for focus and attention. But loving kindness meditation, to me, it's for habit visibility. If you've got unconscious patterns, nothing. I don't know why, by the way. I've been trying to research this and trying to figure out what is it about loving kindness meditation in particular that makes habit loops so visible. Because I've done mantra meditation, I've done focus meditation, I've done prayer meditations, I've done sound, I've done all this stuff, and it's useful, but not like loving kindness meditation for making automatic habits visible. It's so shocking to me. So I'm fascinated by that. That's a little less about focus, but
no.
And I also spent a lot of time trying to training myself to work at faster speeds, which is people don't talk about that, but
what does that look like? Yeah.
well, I remember at very early on in my career, I remember being like late 20s and thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm moving as fast as I possibly can move. Like, I don't know how to work any faster, any harder. And then I remember 6 months after that, I was like, oh my God, I'm working so goddamn fast. I can't believe it. This is insane. And it happened again. And I started to realize, I was like, wait a minute, this is a trainable skill. Like, this is something, right? I'm getting better at this, and this is trainable. And I found that it's very easy when work piles up for overwhelm to shatter focus. So I, pay a lot of attention to like how much work I can get done and still maintain focus and things like that. So I can look back and remind myself, like when shit shows up and I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? I can go back and be like, no, look at all this. You were doing this all in a day. So you know how to do this. I don't know if that's an exact answer to your question, but it's a handful of answers to your question.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, I
After you,
also want to
John.
come back to that meditation piece with the loving kindness. You talk about in The Art of the Impossible. There's a particular piece here where it talks about focus-based practices such as following your breath or repeating a mantra are fantastic for convergent thinking, which is, that's the focus piece. But the creativity side, divergent thinking, which often underpins those far-flung connections, requires an open monitoring style of meditation. I love seeing that you touched on both and the benefits of both, one for focus, one for creativity, and how those are tied together in getting into flow. Focus and creativity are hugely important. But Will, I'll turn it back over to you for whatever question you were going to ask.
No, I mean, how do you manage writer's block? I mean, is there a process that helps you kind of get through those moments?
It's funny because it's actually tucked into the writing section of Art Impossible, though not explicitly. In my experience, and I tend to be very in my experience, it's not something I like to say when I'm talking, because I like things that are shaped by evolution and work for everyone. This isn't in my experience, but in my experience, there are three major causes for writer's block. And I either don't know my starts and my endings, where the book starts or where the chapter starts and where I'm going. And that's the most, usually if there's writer's block, usually if people have writer's block, usually if I have writer's block, that's the biggest problem. The brain is a pattern recognition system. It's a goal-directed pattern recognition system. If you know where you're starting and you know where you're going, your brain is designed to create a path between the two spots. So if you have writer's block, the first thing to check is, I know where I'm starting and I know where I'm heading. The second thing is, I have a tell with this one, and my editors often pointed out to me. I always say, if my writing, I have a guy on my staff who I work very closely with, an editor who reads my stuff a couple times a week and gives me feedback. And he always, what I want is it confusing? Is it boring? Or is it arrogant? If it's confusing, I probably don't know my starts and my endings. I don't know where the path is, right? If it's boring, I probably haven't found the right style, and that can be also a cause of writer's block, right? It's not, the words are carrying the content, but the vibe's wrong. It's not, I'm not doing the thing I want to do. And if it's arrogant, meaning I'm using lots of big fancy words, often, that's like me being lazy, trying to hide the fact from myself that I haven't done enough research. So I'm using all these big fancy words to cover up the fact that I haven't done enough research, and it's really invisible, right? I'm a homeostatic organism like everybody else. My brain doesn't want to expend any more energy than it has to do anything. So I will hide the fact that I haven't done enough research from myself to avoid doing that research by using really fancy language. And my editors have learned over the years to be like, dude, what are all these 10-cent words in here? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Really? Do we need peripatetic in the sentence? Are you sure?
I got to tell you a story really quickly. When I was a young lieutenant, the guy that was just over me, and as far as in the hierarchy, we all have to write fitness reports or basically evaluations on one another. And he wrote this one, and he stuck this word in there, and it was incongrubulatory. And I was like, oh, what the hell is that word? Incongruatory. Well, he's senior me, so he must know what he's writing. And we submitted it up the chain of command. And it turns out he just put it in there just to see where it would get called. It was a total bullshit word. He just made it up. And it took forever. It went all the way up to the commanding officer before anybody said, oh, what is this word? I've looked it up. It doesn't mean anything. So it was a great.
So there's this, like my Ellen Langer, who I mentioned earlier, that really like the godmother of positive psychology and really the first psychologist to sort of focus on mindfulness. She did all these really funny studies back in the 70s where she figured out that if you send inner office memos that look official and ask people to do absolute nonsense, like crazy stuff, they will do that. But if you break the standard format, they won't. Or she figured out that you could cut in line. She did this big experiment where she had people cut in line at copy makers. And as long as you give a reasonable sounding excuse, people will let you cut. So she'd come up and she'd be like, excuse me, I have to cut in line. I have to make some copies. And people be like, oh, go ahead.
That's amazing.
She also found out that there's like a believability filter. Like you can't be like, excuse me, I got to make some copies. There's an elephant chasing me. Because people are like, no. But if you literally are just like, no, I have to make some copies. I'm in a hurry. I have to make some copies. They're like, oh, go right ahead.
Well, the elephant chasing you, that also brings up another piece to the kind of the creativity, the focus, and the writer's block that you mentioned. In The Art of the Impossible, you say, start with something funny, start with something that's completely ludicrous to kind of get your mind wondering. Like write a sentence about, the pink elephant in the room, or something. I forget exactly what it was, but something to that effect, and how that being funny, being creative, and even you mentioned maybe having a little bit of booze before can actually increase your creativity.
I will say that booze is dangerous. Booze can work as a flow trigger a little bit too, but it's a really it's a bad. I had a very dear friend who wrote her first novel drinking a glass of wine to help her start writing. And that was absolutely fine for the first novel. The second novel, which didn't go as well as the first novel, that glass of wine by the end of the novel was like 2 bottles a night. I've seen that problem happen before. But so when we laugh, the brain produces dopamine. Dopamine does a ton of different things in the brain, increases focus and attention, which is great. We talked about why that's important. But it also amplifies pattern recognition, right? Mm-hmm. And so we all have this experience. Once we start telling jokes with friends, ever notice how you get funnier for a little while? That's dopamine actually amplifying pattern recognition in your brain, and you can find more humorous things, right? That's why creative ideas spiral. But if you start with a goofy first sentence and try to follow it, it often just sort of liberates you out of whatever sort of constraint you're in. I did a great on topics of writing. This is a phenomenal exercise. It's really fun to do, and it's a great. You asked about a writer's block here, so when people are really stuck, really stuck, this is a great exercise. Is just stop writing, and for a month, every day, walk to your bookshelf, grab a book at random, open it at random, look at the first sentence you see, and then write that sentence down, and in the style of the author, whatever random author you chose, try to write a page of a short story or just a page, right? And do a different one the next morning and the next morning and the next morning. You'll find, usually if you're a short story writer, by the way, by the end of a month, you'll have like 20 things that are total crap and 10 things that are like, wow, these are interesting. They might become interesting stories. And one of the things that's really cool about this exercise also for younger writers who haven't sort of learned how to write quickly yet, or learn that they can write quickly. Most people, when they start this exercise to write one page, in the beginning, it'll take an hour. But within 2 weeks, you're down to like 20 minutes on right. You've trained up that muscle, and you've trained up your brain's, it's the creativity software, right? The ability to start with a sentence and then fabricate a story from there. It's great training for creativity. It's great training for writing style. If you're just trying to learn how to write in different voices and different styles in different ways, it's a really useful exercise. So when people get really stuck and they're really frustrated, or they can't find the right style for a piece or something like that, I've run it for a month if I get crazy stuck sometimes, but you can do it for a week and still get a lot of interesting benefits out of it. It's also one of the things that's really sort of fun about it, especially if you're not used to being creative and you don't really sort of know how much of that is in you. It's amazing. Because if you start in somebody else's voice, it takes all the pressure off you. You don't have to come up with it.
Yeah.
It's sort of like wearing a mask. You ever notice that if you wear a mask or you talk in a funny voice, you'll say things you would not normally say. Like if I'm trying to imitate my grandfather and I'm speaking in a Russian accent, stuff will come out of my mouth and I'll be like, oh my God, that's really weird. Like, right. And the same thing happens when we were masked on Halloween and all that stuff. These are just play cues, and writing working that way is the same. And I'm always hesitant to use creativity exercises because like I wouldn't want to be forced to like draw in pastels one night and then, you know what I mean, write in it. Like that's not my idea of a good time. So I don't tend to do that when I train people. This way I don't put them through those exercises. But for writers, it's a really great exercise. It's really fun.
Nice.
Well, that's something. It sounds like it also elevate, trust and confidence in your creativity. Which I'd imagine is because I journal every morning and I write a lot and I really just, if I don't have the words will come. But I mean, that exercise sounds wonderful, but it sounds like it's part of the creative process.
It's also fun if you like grab. I remember I grabbed books by 18th century writers. So I used to. This was an old writer's block trick when I was coming up as a journalist because I had to make a living, and like for me to make a living, I had to be writing 5 or 6 or 7 articles at once because they don't pay journalists a hell of a lot. And I would say yes to anything, and I'm super curious, so I'm willing to pretty much research anything. There were every now and again I'd take an article where I was just like, I really don't want to do 5,000 words on data caves or whatever. So I would do 5,000 words on data caves in the style of Charles Dickens. And I'd try to slip, like, can you write a data cave article like Dickens and get it past like an editor? I would do those sorts of things a lot just to keep myself amused.
I would have loved to have read some of those original like submissions and seeing the faces on the editors that read them. That's good stuff.
Cooper, who was the great sort of lion of journalism, the editor-in-chief at GQ for a while, he was really patient with me. He always loved my writing style, but he'd like call me up and be like, Steven, this thing you did here, it's interesting, it's very interesting, but where's that Steven Kotler thing you do? Which is his way of saying, don't try to write like Charles Dickens, motherfucker. Just write your article and turn it in and stop annoying my editors. But he was really nice about it.
That's awesome. So your new book, and I know you said you don't want to talk about what you've just done and you want to start talking about what you've got coming up, but we just wrapped up The Devil's Dictionary, which we found very fun. It's creative, and you kind of weaved in a lot of what we've spoken about today and what you cover in the other nonfiction books, animals, psychedelics, skiing, technology, and altered consciousness. And how does your process for writing a fiction versus a nonfiction, how does that differ, if at all?
It used to differ a lot. And the problem with fiction is tangents. The book can go anywhere, right? You can do anything you want. And early on in my career, I was making errors as a novelist in that when I got stuck, it's really easy to get unstuck by introducing a new character or a wild ass plot twist, right? And it's fine on page 20 or 30 or 40, but you got to pay that shit off on page 200, right? You can't have these plot twists and characters that you introduce and don't go anywhere. It's really unsatisfying to the reader. And so I've learned with fiction that what I talk about, what I call plot discipline, you can, in nonfiction, because there's more of an architecture to it, there's more wiggle room. You can sort of explore tangential ideas more comfortably. With fiction, you can do it, but you have to you've got to be really do it inside of dialogue, inside of characters. Don't start introducing new characters and plot twists and things like that. And so I've learned over the years that fiction, for me at least, I don't know if this is for other people, requires a tremendous amount of discipline. Like I have to discipline my curiosity and like things with language. But I will also say, writing fiction is, I mean, my editor and I laugh almost nonstop when we're like working our way through these books. So, which is not, sometimes it happens with the, you know, the nonfiction stuff. And I try to put humor in all my books, but not at the level that I can do in my novels where, you know, there's a lot more humor in there. So,
Right.
and, you know, oftentimes I'll do things first draft or whatever, just to crack my editor up, just like drop in stuff. Some of that stuff ends up staying in the book. I think in Last Tango in Cyberspace, the precursor to Devil's Dictionary, maybe a little too much of it stated. You know what I mean? Like part of that book is really, really, really funny if you're like a Gen X punk rocker with, you know, like subcultural roots in the late 80s, early 90s. But if you're not those things, you're like, what the fuck is
Yeah.
this dude talking about every now
Yeah,
and again?
exactly. Very, very, very tight moment in time. Very like that little punk rock era for sure. It was like, and if you didn't go through it, you're like, what the hell is that all
No
about?
idea I know.
You talk in also about novelty, you know, being such an incredible flow aspect of flow. I mean, do you like, you know, how much novelty do you bring into, you know, what you're doing? I mean, is it, you go to group flow things, psychedelics or music or something else? If you want to just even talk about the novelty, please, of how important it is for, to kind of access and continually get into the flow state.
So flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. We said that. And we said that flow follows focus. So that's what all the triggers do, right? They drive attention to the present moment. And a lot of them work by producing dopamine. They do other things as well, but dopamine is at the heart of it. And the list of things that produces dopamine is fairly long. Novelty, complexity, unpredictability, risk, creativity, pattern recognition, when we link ideas together. These are all dopamine triggers for the brain. So they all work as flow triggers. Novelty-wise, so a great example just from skiing, from as an athlete, right? If I am on the hill and I'm having trouble getting into flow, right? I can't sort of like, I'm trying to up the challenge level and maybe I'm playing around with risk as a float or whatever, it's not working. I'll use novelty. We'll go to a part of the mountain we've not seen before, go find new woods trails, whatever, go exploring and, you know, use that. I always, risk is a lousy flow trigger to get into the state with. That's a really easy way to go to the hospital, right? Don't take risks in performing at your best, right? Get in a different way, then take the risk. Risk is a better way to stay in flow than get into flow. So that's one example in my daily life. Most people don't think about it this way, but to me, the greatest and most important source of novelty in my life is reading, especially novels. And you have to go and live inside somebody's worldview for a while, right? And I try to read globally so I can get perspectives that are not mine, you know, all that stuff that's really important. So like people don't talk about reading as a huge source of novelty, but as a creative, right? That's hugely important. I live a very, like, you can set your watch by how I live my life. Like I'm very, 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 sort of regimented about certain things. And then there's things where I'm like, okay, now this is the block for novelty or what, you know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. But even with, I'm always, even despite that, I'm always, my workouts change weekly kind of, you know what I mean? I'm always tinkering and playing and exploring that way and things like that. But reading to me, I mean, I used to be travel, used to be a lot of stuff. I've been around the world 4 or 5 times at this point. And, that was the wonderful thing about being a journalist for so long is, I just got to go and do and see so much stuff. So more in terms of, and nature. I'm always, I'm hiking, I'm outside daily, and I very rarely, I'm taking my dogs into the backcountry every day. I live in the middle of nowhere. There's mountains directly out my back door, and I never walk the same trail twice. I'm always going in a direction and things like that. So,
well, talking about being able to set your watch by your calendar, or by your routine rather. How much time do you have, Steven? Because I know we've got 5 minutes more of the show available.
I've got 5 minutes for you. That's exactly what I got.
Okay. All right. Well, then we probably should start wrapping it up. I know Will and I could talk to you all day. We have so many other things that we would love to ask you, and I know our audience would love to listen more. But I also want to be respectful of that regimented, schedule and routine. So we'll start to bring it to a close here. Are there any things that you would like to mention to our audience? I know you've got a new course coming up, the Zero to Dangerous. Would you like to tell us about that before you go, and we'll do the closing practice and call it a day?
Sure. The Zero Dangerous isn't new, but it's worth talking about.
Okay.
I'm CEO of the Flow Research Collective. We're a research and training organization, and we study the neurobiology of peak human performance. On the research side, it's in conjunction with neuroscientists at UCLA, USC, Bureau College London, and so forth. And on the training side, we use what we learn in the science to train everybody. We work in 130 countries. We train everybody from stay-at-home dads to 9-to-5 moms, all the way up to the U.S. Special Forces, professional athletes, with individuals and organizations, from Audi, Accenture, Facebook, on and on and on. And Zero to Dangerous is our core flow training. And what is really cool, and what I like about this, so we train tens of thousands of people, but we're data geeks. So every time 1,000 people come through, we random sample 300 and kind of break down what are their strengths, right? That sort of thing. And the Zero to Dangerous it's not a light training. It's 8 weeks long. It's digitally delivered, but you go through with a PhD psychologist as your hands-on coach. But on average, this is our kung fu is really good. I will say that, but I will also say most people don't get this, and this is so important. Flow is optimal performance, peak performance. It's a universal. We're all designed for it, and it's incredibly trainable. On average, looking at our most recent data, we see after 8 weeks of training a 71.25% increase in the amount of flow in people's lives. Wow. So this stuff is really trainable. It's remarkable how trainable it is. I want to say, if you're not doing a whole bunch of other stuff, that's not sustainable. You'll go up and then you'll come back down. You can keep it there, but there's more required to keep it there than just flow stuff. You got to do some motivation stuff. You got to do this.
I do want to mention, in The Art of the Impossible, you talk about, and many other places, you talk about the more flow you get, the more flow you get. Mm-hmm. But you also, in The Art of the Impossible, mentioned some times where you probably shouldn't be in flow, where you're maybe making a big decision, that type of thing. So
yeah, so I get frustrated. Let's just say frustrated with a lot of people in the coaching space, the performance space, and especially in the self-help space, where it's not all that hard to put people into flow. You can do it. You can alter people's consciousness. And when we're in altered states of consciousness, including flow, the prefrontal cortex, part of your brain that's right back here, is downregulated. When the prefrontal cortex is downregulated, long-term planning is offline, and risk-taking goes through the roof. So there's this thing in the self-help space where people will, they'll take you on a firewalking ceremony or whatever and put you in an altered state of consciousness and then try to upsell you. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's wrong. I think it's criminal. I'm you've literally just shut down long-term planning. You've amped up risk-taking, and now you want to sell me something? We train people in flow when pattern recognition is through the roof. Don't go shopping. It's a disaster. Yep. You will buy shit you do not need. We have a guy who's I like furniture sometimes, and I bought huge pieces of furniture, and they show up, and I'm like, what did you do? Don't go shopping in flow, right? So, and I think, so I do think, we always say there's an order to the process. Inspiration doesn't mean action. Inspiration means, oh, I've been inspired, I should do more research. And at the collective, the order of the process is always inspiration, research, publication, so other people can hammer on your ideas, then communication. And I don't like, you're not allowed to go from inspiration to communication, or you're not allowed to skip steps at the collective, because I don't think it's cool to go out there and, don't tell me about your neat idea. I mean, maybe you can, but if I'm going to present stuff to you as true, I want to have done all the research. I want other really smart people to beat the hell out of the idea to make sure it's true. And then I'm willing to talk about it in public and share it with people. Because then I'm like, okay, this is comfortable. This works for everybody. This is real. I'm not lying.
Right. Well, Steven, hey, it's been a complete and utter pleasure having you here with us. Thank you again for so much of your time. I know you have to go. If you want to drop off, Will and I can wrap up the show. We'll tell our listeners where to find you, and we'll make sure that you guys have this when it publishes. It is live. It's on YouTube now. But again, thanks for joining us, and have a wonderful weekend.
Have a great day.
Thank you, Steven. Peace. Thank you.
All right. Well, there you go,
that
folks.
That was Steven, man.
That was Steven Kotler, and Will and I had so many more questions to ask him, but he's just such a great guy, so interesting, and just has so much knowledge to impart on all of us. So sorry that we weren't able to get to it all, but
maybe John. How about this, John? Like, just before we go, Steven's not here. We have a little more time. There is a lot of information out there. Steven is his I don't know how many hundreds of interviews probably. But, I love his story about how he used flow in order to overcome Lyme disease.
Yes,
which was phenomenal. So if you want to just go, search Lyme disease and Steven Kotler, he was on the couch for like 3 years and at 30 years old. And I didn't realize that Lyme disease actually could create like schizophrenia. I thought it was just like a joint physical thing, but I didn't realize that the disease can get in your brain. But I thought that was really an interesting part of his story as well. And the dog sanctuary, I think, was a big part of it. Actually turned him on to his empathy, which I didn't realize that. He said, I'm just going to read it right here while we're here. Yeah. So he has a Guardian article in 2010 that I went and I researched and I read. And, he said, once I realized that detachment was not only impossible, but also detrimental, I started making progress. I became a better dog rescuer, more patient, more empathic. Empathy was the real doorway into wonder. Once I started feeling for the dogs, I also started really noticing their behavior. It was something to see. And he goes really, the main character in Devil's Dictionary is an empath, which is an interesting, the way he breaks down this character, but is somebody that is able to, empathy track. Yeah. An empath, empathy tracker. Exactly. So he would see a taxidermy deer head on the wall. He would like be in pain, so it's really fascinating, but I wish we could have gotten to more, but I think it was nice to learn more about him, his process, how he puts it all together and how he continually utilizes all the research and all the things that he's written about and puts it into his life in order to be so incredibly prolific. I've never talked to a writer that has published how many books? 19 books, and 14 of them are bestsellers, or 12 of them are bestsellers or something. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So
fantastic interview. Great guy again. And for our audience, thank you for tuning in, both here live and when you tune in later for the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. That said, let's wrap it up with that grounding practice and head into the weekend. All right. So I'll lead it off. Go ahead and get into that comfortable position, whatever that may look like for you, whatever that may feel like, whatever is comfortable and whatever is safe. And we're just going to do some simple box breathing here, similar to what we did at the beginning, but we're going to put a little breath hold at the top and a little breath hold at the bottom. So we'll begin by breathing out, emptying your lungs, bringing your navel to your spine. And breathing in for 5. Hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And out for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Holding empty for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In for 5. Hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Out for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Holding empty for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In for 5. Holding for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And release for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And holding empty for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And last one. In for 5. Hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Out for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And empty. Holding empty for 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And go ahead and start to come out of that practice, doing some of that micro movement. And thank you again. Thank you for joining the show. If you wanted to know more about Steven Kotler, you can head over to his website. It's just www.stevenkotler.com. And you can check out his books on that same website, stevenkotler.com/books. We'd love to have you join in, in future episodes, listening live or listening later in the podcast. We are on YouTube, we're on social media, and we're here on LinkedIn, and then obviously the podcast itself. If you like the show, please share it with your friends, family, whoever you think needs to listen. And I will turn it over to you, Will, to wrap it up for the weekend, brother.
Great to have you all here on our live. Thanks so much for showing up. And anybody that's listening on podcasts, we really appreciate your listenership. And if you want to support the show, we have a retreat again that's coming up in September 16th to the 19th. You can check that out online. And also our merch, which I'm really excited about. John ordered a bunch. I ordered a bunch. Like now I'm having I have 6 t-shirts now and a hat or something. So, and that's on our website as well. So thanks again, everybody. And John, and just love you, John. Thanks for putting this together with Steven, and, and really the two of us putting all this work in to bring him onto the show and having a great conversation with him today. So peace, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Until next time.
Have a great
peace.
Yeah.
Joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.